Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Run With Tobe Podcast. Super excited about this episode. This is our first group session. This time we sat down with a handful of employees here at Tobe Agency, and we got a chance to shed some light on what they do for the company and talk about some culture things in the back end of what's going on here in Tobe, which is really cool. But the main topic that we actually touched on was the difference between working away from an office and in the office, along with working in a co-working space. We got in some pretty cool, deep discussions about it. There's a lot of joking going on. And if you guys want to see some light on Tobe Agency, make sure you tune in to the full episode. Like always, guys, don't forget to rate, subscribe, check us out on social at Run With Tobe, and enjoy the episode. Welcome, everybody, back to the Run With Tobe podcast. My name's Jared, as you may know. If this is your first time here, thank you for joining us. If not, welcome back. This is the first version of this kind of podcast. It's like a group therapy session, I would say, right? Well, we're limited to like an hour because of meetings and stuff, but this is the first like group session that we've ever had on this podcast. Oz and I thought this would be a really good idea. This is the first time Oz is actually on camera for more than 3 seconds. and obviously there's some new faces here, so we're going to introduce everybody here in just a second, but just give a little insight on this episode, or this series, I should say. So we're going to try to do these group sessions with the team more often, maybe like once a month, maybe once every other month, just kind of depends on who's in town, when we can get everybody together, because it is kind of hectic with our schedules. But with that being said, welcome everybody.
Thanks, Jared.
Golf clap.
Thank you. I like your Tobe teal.
Oh, I'm representing Tobe teal on the shoes, and what did I call it? I forget when I was like creating the brand guide. I called it like a certain color.
Tobe teal?
Tobe teal. We'll go with that.
Yeah,
We'll go with that. No, because I remember calling the gray Mako gray. I always liked Mako sharks. So I was like, this is going to be Mako gray. I'm going to stylize it. It literally says that in the brand guide. But anyway, that's
the claim to fame there.
Yeah. Well, we won't go into that on this episode. Okay. So let's go ahead and just do some quick introductions before we jump into the main topic today. And this is kind of definitely open format, as people who have listened to Run With Tobe know that this podcast is more open format than our other podcast, Lights, Camera, Grow. So yeah, let's start. Let's just go around the world here and introduce. So, Oz, I'm going to give you the first go around because
Why me?
Because your name
this is my first time on camera.
Your name comes up more than any other name besides myself and Andrew, and you're never on screen. So let's go ahead and start with you.
Way, we should make a compilation of my name, like Oz behind the camera, Oz behind the camera from other podcasts.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Oz, and I'm the other half of the creative side, and I just edit videos, take pictures, and sometimes try to graphic design,
Yeah, he's a little bit more than that. A little bit more than that.
That's the most like simplest version of.
So that's what you do on the we'll say on the operations side of things, right? You actually operate in those facilities as like you're an editor, and then you're sometimes a photographer, and sometimes you're helping plan the creative. But all around creative dude, has a really good eye. Check him out on Instagram if you're into portrait photography. He's a really talented, really shameless plug, but he's a really talented photographer. We'll link everybody's socials up in the show notes like we always do. But yeah, so Oz is, like you said, he's one half of the creative. He's definitely a lot behind the scenes. He's a big reason why we're able to produce the podcast at the capacity that we've been able to produce it. So shout out to you, man.
Thanks.
Cool. So who else? Who wants to go next? Everybody. Well, people have known Kaylin. She's been on one episode, and then there's another one coming out soon. So let's go to Jen.
Oh yeah. So I'm Jen, and I'm doing the content side of Tobe. That's pretty much it.
Yes. It's more than that.
Very modest.
It's more
what
than
is
that.
content?
Yeah. So explain a little bit about what you do, and I mean you don't have to go into like the fine details.
I was the worst one.
Oh no, so like some of the social copies for the blog post and some carousel posts. So yeah, so we kind of curate the content side for Tobe brand and some clients' social copies as well.
Yeah. So, Kaylin definitely could probably explain your job position way better than I could, but Jen does handle a lot of our content for clients and for Tobe internal. So like she said, she's in charge of once Oz and I kind of create the creative side of it, then we may have a copywriter or somebody writing a blog post or something. Jen kind of curates it all together, puts it together, packages it, and then makes sure it gets delivered in a timely fashion, which is super important, and delivered properly in the specs that it needs to be delivered in. I don't know. That's pretty much? Did you say that's
your job title?
I know, right?
Yeah, I'd say. All right, cool. So we'll skip Kaylin for now because we
don't like her.
We'll save her for last. But no, let's go to Jeremy. Jeremy is never been spoken about on the podcast, but he is behind the scenes nonetheless and very important. So,
what's up, guys? My name's Jeremy. I am a project lead at Tobe Agency, and I also do a lot of the HubSpot automation. Yeah, I just help make sure that our deadlines get met, that we deliver everything that we promised we would, and hopefully over-deliver on everything too.
Totally. Yeah. So like Jeremy was mentioning, he's a project lead, which can get like the titles can kind of blur together at some point, but the project lead is super important because they're essentially the hub between the client and our team most of the time. So Jeremy's working hand in hand with the clients, but he's also then relaying all the information back to the team and making sure that it's delivered to our team in a fashion where we can digest it and bring back whatever his requests are, on time and obviously on point the first go around. Doesn't always happen, but
right. I think that's another, you bring up another good point about just like working in like a small agency is like all of us actually wear like a lot more hats than we have on, I guess, so.
Yeah. And Andrew and I have talked about that at length, where we're always wearing multiple hats. It's just kind of how startup life in any company is, but especially in an agency, you're kind of, sometimes you're this person to one client, but a different person to another client or a different position to another client. And then you touched on HubSpot, which is obviously a huge part of our agency. We're a HubSpot partner. Andrew and I have talked about that at length also on the podcast, but that's really important. So Jeremy handles all of our HubSpot automation setup for either clients or Tobe itself. So anything behind the scenes.
Yeah. So along the HubSpot lines, I think a lot of people hear about HubSpot and then get an idea that like, okay, we can just handle it ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
And then they kind of just jump in it head first and don't realize there's a lot of like details that you don't want to miss, because if you miss them or you set them up incorrectly, then it's going to be just like a huge hassle down the line.
Yeah.
So yeah, we make sure that we check off all the check boxes, hit all of the important parts of an implementation to make sure HubSpot's set up and working properly.
Yeah, and then that also goes into like building out more robust automations, things like that, and we handle that all inside the agency, and Jeremy leads that up. So, all right. Kaylin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Kaylin. Sorry.
We're like,
it was easier when it was before. I'm Kaylin. I'm a content strategist at Tobe, and I am visiting LA right now. I'm usually located in Boston. Go Pats.
Whoa. You're trying to get us like hate already. Like they have like, yeah, we're gonna definitely get some hate mail on that one. Right now, let's talk about the Bruins. Right now, the Bruins are like in it.
Hate me. Kaylin at tobeagency.com.
Thanks, Oz. I'm not the only one here.
Yeah. So, Kaylin and I, we talked about, we had a podcast recently where it hasn't come out yet, but we talked about at length kind of more of her roles on the like production side, as far as making sure that we're like producing content and processes, more importantly, and building these processes in a orderly fashion. So she heads up a lot of our technology, if you will. on the back end of Tobe as far as like project management, communications, documentation, things like that. And yeah, tools in general. And she's a content strategist. So she's sitting down with the clients and figuring out what the best plan of attack for their roadmap is ahead of time. And then hopefully we're sticking to that. Most of the time we do. And then, if we have to,
I think a lot of it
you have to zig sometimes when you need to zag, it happens. But yeah.
No, absolutely. All of our clients have such interesting stories and backgrounds and services. And it's really about, finding focus and speaking to the target audience that they want to be speaking to in a more organized and streamlined way.
Yep, exactly. And so that's our team that's here today. We do have quite a few members that aren't here today. They couldn't be here either because of distance or baby. And meaning which I'm talking about my partner in crime, Andrew. He's 50% of Run With Tobe usually, but right now he is being 100% dad, which is awesome. So he wasn't able to make it to this podcast, but he'll be on in a group session in the future. But yeah, everybody who's listened to the podcast before knows Andrew. He's our fearless leader. He kind of takes charge and leads up everything at Tobe Agency as far as like on the marketing side and the operations side, and then I handle all the other stuff on the creative side. Yeah, so I guess I'll just introduce myself briefly. So if you haven't listened to our podcast, my name's Jared again. I'm the creative director here at Tobe Agency. I lead up all the creative. So if that's anything from anything that's visual, I don't really lead up a lot of the copy stuff. I'll have my hand in it sometimes if it needs to be kind of overlooked, but as everybody knows here, reading and writing are not my forte. If it's visual, down. Throw a picture in front of me, I'll probably figure it out.
Doesn't use words.
I don't use words. Just like just call me a mime. Which is why we're not writing this in a blog and we're talking about it on a podcast. But yeah, so that's kind of like what I do. And then just being that we're a small startup, I kind of put my hands in everything just like everybody else here. So we kind of all share different roles. But yeah, so that's the team that's here. And then we do like I said, we do have some people that are not here, unfortunately, because of distance, which is what is going to bring us into today's subject. And it's kind of ironic because the team members that we would love to hear their opinions on this topic, and maybe we'll do a version 2 of this, or we can
do it when Zari's here in town.
Part two, when we have other members in town, or maybe we even just sit down and do half Zoom, half live, to try to figure that out. It's kind of tough to coordinate that. We do have a lot of cameras going right now, plus a Zoom would be even more difficult to add, but it can be done.
Of course, Oz is gonna edit it.
No problem. Oz is just gonna
I'll
figure
it out.
So today's topic is working remotely versus working in the office. And the reason why we wanted to start the group therapy session, I'm gonna call it that, group therapy.
Group therapy.
Tobe
Roundtable.
Okay.
Tobe therapy.
Tobe therapy. Tobe
Office
after
therapy?
hours. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
The reason why we wanted to talk about that in session 1 is because this type of session is about building culture, and that's something that as a startup, it's really hard to do when you're like 3 dudes or 2 dudes, or like three people essentially, or less than 5. Really, I would say it's really hard to build culture. You can't build culture because you're so focused on everything else in the business, making sure that you're getting clients and making sure that you have enough money to pay payroll for those people and whatever else. And now we're getting to the point where we're starting to build some culture. So I think it's pretty important to do these kind of like open forum discussions where we kind of just talk about stuff. And that leads us into that topic, like, because half of our team is kind of remote. Nikki and Zara, 2 critical components of our team, are remote. We have some writers that are remote, obviously. And then we have some new team members that are remote. Rebecca. Who else
Allie's remote.
Allie is remote. Yep.
Rich is remote.
Rich. Who else?
Megan.
Yep. Megan. Yep. So you can see that we have, what's that?
Zara.
Yeah, Zara. Yeah, you can see that we have half the team here, half the team out of here. Kaylin's usually remote. She's come in and out in the last couple of years as kind of as needed and as different projects roll out. So she's half remote, half not, I would say, right? Like half the year. But even
On call.
On call.
From Boston
On
to
call,
LA.
that's
All
right.
the way
On
here.
call from Boston. But even at that point, it's like still you're only here for like a week, 2 weeks at a time. So it's a lot of us are definitely working remote. Andrew's working remote when he can right now because of the baby. So this is a really big thing, and it's not only in our company. This is something that's happening like around the world. This is becoming more common. One of my neighbors recently just bought a house in Arizona, but his job is in Atlanta. And he flies back and forth, and and same thing with Terry. Like he's flying back and forth. You've got every week. So this remote thing, where people are working remotely, and traveling like on planes as if they were taking an Uber, it's kind of like happening more often.
Can't even handle like 15 minutes of commute. How people does that?
That's interesting because it's like the world's becoming
Smaller.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and
we have access to so much like places that are so much further, whereas like even 40, 50 years ago, taking a flight across the country wasn't something that you're going to do.
Big deal.
It's a luxury.
Every month,
hold the mic closer. Hold the mic closer. Okay, there you go. You guys are gonna hear.
Reminder.
I know one of those is going to make it into the edit. Hold the mic closer. Like it's just going to keep happening. But yeah, you're right. The world is like kind of contracting because of technology, obviously, and even to some point like transportation, right? Like Oz has been studying Elon Musk like religiously.
Just a big fan.
And so Elon, if you hear this, give us a shout out.
Just taking SpaceX. It's right here. I just need a tour.
True, it is
That's
right
all
here.
I need.
But
Just a tour.
even some of the stuff you've been talking about, with like the space travel of like being able to travel across the world in minutes because you're cutting the distance by going vertically. But and
I'm waiting for
other physics
teleportation.
Yeah.
me too.
Said that,
Totally.
yeah. We all need that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of
We
like
all need
philosophical topics on teleportation.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a
still
little
waiting for
difficult.
it.
Yeah. I mean, they did it in Willy Wonka. Anyway. So yeah, let's dive into what it's like to work remotely. I think at some point here, everybody has worked remotely. Maybe not for a company per se, but maybe for a client, because we've all done kind of like freelance projects or we've been part of other companies. So yeah, let's just open up the floor.
Well, I think it's interesting how not only companies are hiring people that are remote, but more and more clients are looking for partners and agencies and vendors that are also not near them. And people don't consider geography like a deal breaker as much. I mean, in some industries, I'm sure that, having someone or a company that's on the other side of the country, it wouldn't work out. But for the most part now, why limit yourself to the resources, that are close to you just because they're close to you?
Yeah,
when there
totally.
is all this technology in place that allows for like the meetings and the screen shares and etc.
Yep. Like you wouldn't want. Well, it's gonna happen, but you wouldn't want surgery being done remotely just yet.
I
Just
mean,
yet.
always.
But it's gonna happen. I mean, especially now with like the new version of the iPad, and you can control it with you can connect it to your
The
Mac,
robots
like,
and stuff.
and use it as like a Wacom tablet. And then I'm just kidding. Anyway.
We
But
have
yeah,
a
I think
lot.
that's an interesting point that I don't think we necessarily actually thought about. But yeah, like clients are now okay with this thought process of like, hey, part of your team is not going to be here face to face, but
it makes sense for them too. It's cheaper. There are a lot of a
Yeah.
lot more talent. Like there's
Talent.
big
the
there's
talent
big
pool just expands.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
I think it comes down to basically just finding the best person that you can for the job.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was like, okay, I'll settle
Yeah.
with this person just
Right.
because they're in this
They're
area.
local.
I mean,
Right.
we're in
Come into the
LA. There are a
office.
lot of talents. There are a lot of people here. But if the company is in smaller city,
Right.
you have really few options. But now it's not like that.
Yeah,
You can
but
just
now
hire
they can
someone from
connect
LA,
to an LA hub
Yeah.
Mhm.
and work via the internet.
Yeah, one of our
Um,
clients, Expert Option.
yeah.
The Columbus, Matic is in Columbus, and they work with us right
Right.
here. We just go there and then make the videos, and then the rest is just online.
And there's some companies that even don't have an office at all that are
Right.
100% remote, and they'll do every quarter, a little retreat work for a week somewhere
Right.
for meetings.
Can we
but
do that?
then the rest of the time, and I mean that I think probably comes down to why pay for rent.
Totally. Yeah.
Essentially, and that could change over time. I'm just like how everyone was all about like the open office, big open office
Right,
workspace,
right.
and they thought it was the best thing ever for the last 5 years, and now they're like, oh, maybe not
Right.
so much. So we'll see. I mean, it really depends on the company as far as like the people and the tools and how you lay it out and expectations and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about how like I don't know which came first, the mentality that it's okay to be working, like co-working and like remotely or across the country, or if these co-working spaces started popping up and then like people started going like, oh, this is actually a good idea, because just around El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, there's probably like 4 or 5 of the same
within like 5 miles
of the
each
same
other.
co-working companies. Yeah,
Yeah,
literally.
Definitely.
Within 5 miles.
Manhattan Beach, there's 20, at least 20.
And that's not even naming like the little ones too.
Right.
There's like little ones that aren't like spaces or the
Or
other one
WeWork
across
or
the street,
the other one,
know?
the other one, the ones we don't speak of.
Yeah.
Why? All right, Brandon, if you heard that, like, oh, we're sorry, we don't want to offend you. I think, just to go back to your point about what came first, I mean, I definitely think it just happened as far as like, oh, people are realizing that you could work remotely, so I'm just going to sit at home and work, right? And that just came with the age of the internet. And like, and there's always that joke, right? Like the fat guy sitting in the basement naked who's working from home, right? There's always that joke, right?
Jen and I were actually talking about that.
Yeah, there's always that joke, right? And but I think co-working spaces started to pop up because it was a need for like people to look more professional. Like, oh, I got to take a business call. I can't sit here with like, whatever behind me. So the co-working space,
and it was more financially realistic.
And for smaller businesses, it gives businesses a chance that can't open a brick and mortar like building to like, like it's a lot to take down when you're like starting a company and you want to like have your own personal space. It's like you got to take a long lease and then you got to furnish it and then you got to pay. It's just like, renting any other piece of property, but and sometimes it's even more because they want more commitment and it's really expensive, especially here in like LA. It's really expensive. But like, and just to kind of like, I guess I don't want to say rebuttal, but like, where companies are feeling more comfortable hiring remote teams, I like Andrew and I thought it was still important that we had like a home office. Like you were saying, companies that don't have a home office, he and I thought it was important to at least have a home office so we could build like the core team that we were going to interact with mostly every day. And obviously that's expanded because of we've hired people that are core team now that are outside. But in the beginning, when it was just him, essentially the three of us, we needed a place where we could sometimes have a client come in and visit us. We just needed a place where he and I could sit down and just be next to each other and figure out ideas and hit the whiteboard and do stuff like that. So it was really important for us. But with that being said, we were like, well, we can't take down a real space. We're going to have to do the co-working space. And it's great. Like it's, and I think this model, co-working spaces in general, is going to just keep growing for a lot of companies. And you can put up like we could open one in Boston, right? We could have like a chapter in Boston, and Kaylin and whatever team we build could go there, and we could have one in wherever else, Vancouver or wherever. So
Bali.
Bali. I don't think they have.
She's obsessed with Bali.
It's going to be a co-working hut. With like a
there are like hundreds of them in Bali, in Indonesia, in Thailand right now because all the remote workers, they go there.
Yeah.
Way cheaper and
right.
Yeah, I would go, but
no shoes required.
Yeah, there are some restrictions. So restrictions for us at least, why we need to kind of tie to the office, especially Oz and I, is we have hardware restrictions. We need to like make sure that we can like upload our footage to a server. Maybe after 5G, that might change. Yeah, and seriously, that's 5G and that new Mac Pro that's coming out. Like things like that are going to change.
Or $20,000-$40,000.
Yeah,
Mac setup.
Yeah,
probably more than that. And 2 of those, by the way. So.
Yeah. So how do you feel on a weekly, daily basis working remotely? Because I think one of the challenges, and this is me being old guy in the room, one of the challenges is like sometimes. I enjoy turning around and saying, "Hey, Jeremy," or "Hey, Oz," like let's talk about this. I enjoy that. And I also know that like it's instant, where sometimes where it's remote, you're like, ping, 20 minutes later, ping, like, oh, hey, did you get to this? And then it starts to feel like you're more annoying, where when you have that face-to-face interaction, you can kind of read the room and figure out what you you can get done right away. So how does it feel like when you're far away?
I think it's interesting because it's a fine line between the immediacy and, you know, being able to turn around and ask someone a question. But at the same time, I mean, it's been a couple years since I was in an office full time, but there are like stuff like that throughout the day. It adds up as far as like, wait, what was I doing again?
Right.
When you turn back around, and there's studies saying, you know, to realign and figure out what you're doing before someone comes in and asks you the question takes however long to reset and say, okay, this is what I was working on. So there are definite pros and cons. I think it's also, like you said, reading the room. And if someone seems like their head's down and busy, just because they're there, you might not want to ask them right away.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's just being self-aware of the situation and whatever. And if, you know, I feel like a lot of days I'm on calls pretty much all day anyway. So sometimes I'm not by my computer, like reading the Slack messages, but it'd be the same if I was in the office.
Right.
Like, so it's just letting people know if you're on the calls.
Yeah, I think communication, then it just becomes really important to like let people know.
Use the status on your Slack.
Yeah. I never use it. Mine just stays lit green and it says always on.
Yeah, use it always up.
It's
Yeah,
always
you
lit.
actually like always respond
But-
within like, a
Literally,
couple
yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
I think I think being, you know, part owner of the company, it's pretty important that at least I'm available, you know, like
I'm gonna check my Slack status
Um,
right
so how do you guys feel about like being in the office? So let's talk about that on the other side of it.
I think it's definitely nice to have interaction and get to know people. And then especially in a co-working space, you can also meet people from different companies. And then you kind of interact with different people, getting different ideas around. And then especially in the office itself, I guess it's more fun.
Yeah,
More
that's
fun.
the culture side of it,
Yeah,
right? That
it's
starts to kick in. Or depending on where you work, it could be not more fun, but yeah.
Getting bullied.
Yeah.
You know, hint, hint.
Wait, why did you look at me when you said getting bullied?
But,
What did I do?
It's definitely nice to like be in the office, and because when you communicate, that's when your inspiration sparks, and
Yep.
then you have different creative ideas, like how we were doing the roundtables for our content strategy. Then that wouldn't have happened if we were sitting away from each other and not bombarding each other
Right.
with questions and ideas and thoughts.
Right.
So yeah, that's
where I think it gets hard is like when we have these like larger group discussion type things, and even if you have somebody on like a brainstorm, even if you have somebody on a Zoom call, like you already know, you're like, okay, we've set this meeting for an hour. This is all the time we really have. This person needs to jump off, and even if we have to jump off for other meetings internally, you can't just say, okay, we'll wrap that up right when I get back. You know, it's really hard, I think, then to set more time aside to like finish unfinished thoughts up,
Mhm.
you know, and I think that it then it gets sidebarred. You're like, oh, we'll go back to that next week. And then it takes like the chemistry part of it, you
Mhm.
know, or the synergy. I don't really know
Synergy.
I don't know what the word is. I don't know. It's
I
just
think
some
it'd be
word part of it.
I bet this exists, and this is the app junkiness talking.
Oh, here we go.
It would
welcome
be,
to Kaylin's app corner.
oh my gosh, that would be awesome.
App, web bar, like the entire.
Hey, no, wow,
Okay, we
judgment,
should
judgment.
leave here and I come back
This
after
is-
3 hours.
I think there's some that, or I'm sorry, I think there are some that Slack actually does integrate with, but I haven't tried them out at all. But verbally flushing things out is a lot easier, as we were saying, and rather than typing. So if there's something that where you can like leave voice messages,
Well,
but make it a conversation, but someone can reply like later.
Yeah.
So you can kind of
I
have
mean,
a verbal brain dump,
Well, you kind of can do that. So
but
like,
it's like
regular
in an
messages,
organized way.
Yeah, regular
Yeah.
messages does it, right? You can send messages. Instagram, you can do it now.
Right.
Like Facebook Messenger, you can do it. There are that, but it's still a one-sided conversation. Like I can't
Mm.
interrupt you
You
and
have
say,
to
wait a minute,
wait,
I don't
yeah.
think, which I probably would do.
But I
anyway.
mean, as a alternative to coming back to something a few days later because you
Right.
can't finish. If you want to complete your thought and that person has to jump, like brain dump away,
Yeah.
and then at least that person can
True.
respond in a much faster way than thinking about. Because emails, typing out emails take a
Yeah.
lot longer than you always.
I hate typing.
Yeah, it takes
like Slack.
so long to properly word things and not want to. You don't want to
Not
come off.
offend anyone.
Exactly.
Ask
You don't
me
want to
about
come off
that.
the wrong way.
Yeah.
But when you can leave a message, you can at least hear the tone and
Right.
But I mean, voicemails are annoying, and
Yeah.
just something that keeps it more organized.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
I
like
guess.
Being the millennial in the group.
another thing about like working in like a confined space, in an office that you're not separated by cubicles. And this is partially probably because like how the culture was when I first came in.
Yep.
Like you and Andrew have always like tried to foster like a culture where people don't feel nervous about asking questions,
Right.
or
Right.
don't feel nervous if they don't know something, So I think being in the office and having that ability to just be able to turn around and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Like, can you show me how to do this real quick? It's been like really helpful for me just coming up to speed with like HubSpot, and like everything in terms of like HubSpot marketing and how they do it, inbound marketing. But that's not to say that like that's not possible with someone that's located remotely, because there have been times where I have a question about a client's campaign or something, and I'll literally just call Kaylin and say, hey, like, what's going on with this, or what do I have to do for this? And
Yeah, I think it just comes down to how like the person that you're hiring remotely needs to understand that. I mean, and this is all based off, whatever the agreements are, but they need to understand that there's going to be a certain level of like, hey, I need to just hit you up and we need to talk about this. Yeah. And it's almost like an on-call. But even like when I'm out of the office, and this is again me being resident old guy, when I'm out of the office, I get like 100 times more anxious because I feel like I'm not able to like facilitate or ask questions or get answers that I need in the time that my mind thinks I need them. So again, that's probably just me being like resident old guy and always mostly in my careers have worked in
I think that's a common thing, because it's like you feel like you don't have
it almost feels like
The
you're
power
full
to-
capability.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm out of the loop. Like it would be really hard for me to convert to like being out of the office. And part of the thing is like I like getting up and coming to a place, it was the couple months that I did do the home office thing, like it was really hard for me to like get into that mode. I would like get up, get dressed, like shower like I was going to like a job and treat it like I'd even wear shoes into the office. Well, again, because like that's something I'd been so used to doing. It's really hard.
So cute.
Yeah, I know. Like all the freelancers are like no pants. And
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
like,
we were talking
We were
about
just
that.
talking about that.
under
We were
t-shirts.
just talking about that.
But it's really hard.
If only
it's
you
really
guys
hard.
knew.
And it's really hard to flip that switch, and Kaylin probably had that. I mean, she can understand, like she probably, because she worked in an office and then she didn't. So it's like really hard to like kind of flip that switch, and then vice versa. Like if you're used to being at home and just kind of being confined to yourself, when you come into the office, you might get anxious and be like, "Holy shit! Like I have a lot of people around me. This is like a lot of noise." But
yeah.
the
Sorry,
conversion is
It's like the
hard.
same thing as like when I was in college, like I couldn't study at home.
Yeah.
I had to get
Yeah.
out of the house just
Exactly.
to be in a different mind state.
Right.
Because when I'm at home, I'm usually in like relaxed mode. I don't want to
Exactly.
get anything done really. Well,
Yeah.
not get anything done.
It's a
but-
different timeline, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're
Becomes
just in
island
like
time.
a different vibe,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there should be like two sides, like you guys said, like the brainstorm parts or like that chatting roundtable parts. Of course you should be here, but besides that, when I edit something, I would love to work at home, like uninterrupted
focus.
6 hours, because when I'm here you go to the bathroom, like you just go grab a
Sure.
coffee, you talk to people, you do stuff, like that's difficult.
That's interesting. So
That's
it's
why-
like the
Like
opposite.
it should
Yeah.
be,
We need
yeah.
an editing bay.
Yeah.
What?
We need an editing bay. That's why. We need, like,
yeah,
we could just
yeah,
lock
yeah,
you-
yeah,
lock you
okay.
in a dark-
or that, yeah.
Just lock
Just
you in
like
a
rent
dark
another
room.
office, just
Yeah.
dark,
Run out
yeah.
the closet under the stairs
Yep,
at
yep.
Unita.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, like it should be balanced, I guess.
So-
I love like working remotely. Also, there's some stuff that you cannot do as like
Right.
while you're working.
Well, it's
remotely.
interesting to hear you talk about this, and I actually was going to ask this a little bit later, but it's interesting to hear you talk because as resident young guy,
Yeah.
for those of you who
9
don't
to
know,
5 was my like biggest fear, and then now
Oz is the youngest member of our team, and this is also his first like, I don't want to say real, I don't want to say real job because it's not your first. You've had real jobs, but this is like,
I've had a lot of real jobs.
Yeah, this is
like real jobs.
Like off.
but this is like
Oh,
your
no,
first
like,
office type
bunch of
job,
weird-
right?
yeah, yeah.
So like you've worked obviously being a photographer, you've done a ton of freelance. I don't like when you're like 15. You could say those are jobs, but I don't count those as jobs. Whatever. So like, how is it like? How has it been for you, like coming into like an office type culture?
Yeah, it's different. So for me, like the inspiration comes in different times to me. Sometimes when I wake up early, I'm so inspired. I can do stuff like I have motivation. I can just sit down and work 5 hours. But sometimes it's at night. So when I was a freelancer, or like remote at home, or I was a member at Unita, our old office, I would just go and work whenever I want, whenever I have the motivation. But now you have to have that energy and motivation at a certain point,
right?
Like certain time. That was the most difficult thing. But besides that, I love the environment here. I love like working with people. Like I said, I love that brainstorming sessions. I love that just turning around and asking people questions. And now we have the team, so I don't have to do everything by myself. Like let's say the first podcast that I would edit, I would just go edit, pick the clips that we're gonna post, try to write like titles for those clips. But now it's not like
it was
that.
difficult.
I have Jen, I have like Jeremy, they do that too. So that part of the office is perfect, but like I said, that like timing, and the commuting part, I hate commuting. Like, altogether. It's not just
you
work.
ride a skateboard to work.
I know, but still, I know. Probably my commute is the best in the world.
Let's time out for a second. He rides a skateboard near the beach.
And it's motorized. And it's motorized.
I know.
Why are you complaining?
But still, like I said, I just don't like the commute. But yeah, that's
your commute, my friend, is like 110% better than 90% of the community here in LA. So
I mean, my commute is going across my apartment, but yours is not bad. Yours is not bad. Yours is not bad though.
Yeah, I got here in 7 minutes on my electric skateboard.
Yeah. We have a Tobe Electric Skateboard Club that we're starting.
I'm trying to join, but the boys are being a little
no girls allowed.
No,
I'm kidding.
We were just thinking about you cannot ride it with your high heels.
Yeah, we just said
that's what we said.
She was literally wearing like 3-inch heels.
4
inch. 4-inch heels. Sorry. I was like, hey, let me ride your skate. Like,
no, you're not.
You can kill yourself.
No.
Health and safety.
I balanced on it.
No, we're not taking that liability now. Just do it outside.
That's fine. Lunchtime. No, to go off of Oz's point, I think all of our jobs require a certain extent of deep work at some point, and that is a challenge in offices in general. But yeah, brainstorming and being able to see people even more clearly. Like with the videos, we use Zoom for everything.
Right.
So
screen share.
Now when I have a conference call on the phone, I'm not really sure what to do with it because you can't see people's reactions, but sometimes people's the video's cloudy or it's kind of dark and it's still kind of hard to read everyone's faces.
Or if their camera's off, you have no idea if they're even looking at the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's nothing that can really replace being face to face and in person. But there's also time when you just need to be in the zone.
Be in your zone, for sure. Yeah.
Well, they say like language is, I forget the exact numbers, but it's like language is, or communication is like 60% body language, 30% how you say it, and then 10% is what you actually say.
Right.
Yeah, I read that too. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear our other counterparts that unfortunately aren't here for this part, to hear their opinion, who are actually more they're more remote than even I would say Kaylin, because Kaylin visits a couple times a year. It would be interesting to hear some of their thought process, because I always wonder, like, once you get off the screen and you're kind of sitting by yourself and you're kind of just, I guess you're in your zone, like, does the amount of hats you wear start to narrow down because you're disconnected? Like, is it better to focus and be specialized when you're remote, like 95% of the time?
I think it depends on like what you do,
Yeah.
Like let's say for me, it wouldn't really matter most part.
Sure.
Because I'm just gonna sit down and edit the same video.
Well, yeah, but that's not all you do. Like a lot of like your collaborations with Jen that have been happening in the recent weeks. That. Think about that type of process, right?
That will definitely,
or like honestly, like I some of our best days in creative are like when you and I just sit and look at the same thing at the same time and we talk about it. We don't even like really get anything done, but we just figure out like you know like certain weird like hippy dippy creative
Yeah.
stuff. But
Sometimes
Hippie
we just sit down and watch YouTube videos, like, and then,
and we figure stuff out, right?
and then,
yeah.
and then just write
Cat
an idea.
videos.
And then,
Cat videos.
No cat videos.
I watch that on my phone, like,
Yeah.
on the side.
We'll save that for that's an interesting topic. We should definitely talk about that on another group session.
Cat videos.
No,
Oh, I was thinking cat
I was like,
videos.
cat videos?
just the restriction
Yeah.
of just
Like,
like
how
how
to get
certain
inspiration,
companies,
like, what
well,
you
how
do,
certain
yeah.
companies like restrict internet access. Obviously,
Oh,
like
yeah.
Whoa,
like it's one thing if
that's
you're just like dicking around on Facebook and Instagram all day, but like I remember being in just even in creative companies where like they would restrict the amount of YouTube you'd watch
Oh,
because they were like, oh, you're watching too much YouTube, but you're like, yeah, but I'm kind of doing research for like what we need to
Creatives,
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, we'll talk about that in a different session, but yeah, so it would be interesting to hear our missing links today on what their viewpoint is like. So we'll definitely have to do a part 2 of this where we
Oh, yeah.
include them because
Definitely, and I think it's interesting that Oz's point about having the flexibility to work when you know you perform
like, what
best,
to do.
because
Yeah.
everybody does have their own internal clocks,
Yeah.
and their own internal cycles about when they're productive versus when they
Hungover.
Hungover, yeah, maybe.
Some people are just more creative or more focused at night, and that's how they've always been. So I think even when people work from an office, not being so like, this is exactly what time you have to get in and this is what time
Right.
we leave, or like let them feel that out, and see
And,
what
we
works
have
for
that
the
here.
company and
We
see
have
what works
that
for
here,
them.
you know?
we're pretty flexible about
yeah,
that. I mean, we do have like a start time and an end time, but for the most part, unless you're like part of like a client meeting or not, we're pretty flexible. We're not like rigid hard against it. And I get the point of like working at night. I mean, I was like that all the way up until I had a baby.
Makes sense.
And now I don't have a choice, so I had to flip that mindset. But yeah, there would be times where I would just like I'd sit all day, and even if I was at a job where I had to produce something, like I didn't really get the high gear good ideas until later on that night, and then I'd be like, oh well, now I'm tired
Yeah.
and I can't do anything.
And I think like or in my opinion, I think the biggest thing that will contribute to successfully like having a team that's both working remote and in an office is the actual people,
Yeah, totally. Yep.
because
Everybody
I
has
think,
to buy in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you learn pretty quickly whether or not someone is there just to have it as a job or because they want to be
They believe in
in the company, they believe in what they're doing. So like I think like you guys or Jared, Andrew, Kaylin, you guys have all put together like the Tobe values and stuff. And it's interesting because now that I've been here for like almost a year, it's like I really do see where these values, like being self-aware, especially being self-aware, comes into play, because like it's like just like Oz said, he's aware that sometimes he's not as efficient as other times, but he's also aware that he has to be in the office with everybody else, So, and it's also just being able to manage yourself,
Right.
to manage your time, manage like your capability, what you're able to do. And I think everybody on the Tobe team does a really good job with
Yeah.
that.
I think also managing your relationships
Yeah,
between
totally.
everybody. Like
totally.
my relationship to Jen is completely different than my relationship to Oz, to Kaylin, to Jeremy, to even Andrew at some extent, right? So I think understanding, and that's the self-awareness, like understanding how you can manage each relationship. And that just comes with, I guess, adulting.
Yeah.
Right? The older
Yeah.
you get, the better off you become
Yeah,
at, like,
yeah.
hopefully the better off you become at, relationships in general. But I think that plays a key point. So yeah, that's some great
That's actually
insight.
another great point, because in past jobs I've worked in like cubicle land where it was
Yeah.
an entire floor full of
Office
just
space.
Yeah, exactly.
On
like
the
office
phone.
space, man.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
work.
And
it's
that's what
like-
I meant by the open office thing earlier.
Oh,
is
yeah.
the one big room with like it feels like a
100 people in.
Yeah.
and
It's
it's
literally
just
everyone's just heads
typing.
down,
Heads down,
you know?
yeah.
You just hear click, click,
Well,
click, click, click.
That's
There's-
not the open office, by the way. When
That's
they,
not,
Yeah,
yeah.
when
Open
they
office
did the
is
open
like-
office,
is our
it
floor
wasn't
plan.
the point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
well, what's
but-
the big open one room? We don't have, even the CEO doesn't have an office because
Yeah,
we want everyone.
that's
That's an open office.
but without the cubicles.
Yeah. So there's like a really great Vox video on that when they created the I forget the name of the architect, but when they created the open offices, there will be like 2 feet like between the desks, and then
Okay, gotcha.
everybody have everybody
And you're all
have
facing
their
the same
own-
way, and like,
Yeah.
yeah.
space, and then
Yeah,
they
that's a
have, like,
horrible
their own
idea.
little cabinets and stuff, not like just
It-
cubicles. You know,
it's
it would be
so-
like open. You know,
I worked in a company that they called it a flat hierarchy, where basically everybody was on the same level. And it definitely has its pros and its cons. You know, like it gets really distracting, but everybody
yeah.
at some point has their headphones on, so you don't hear anything anyway. But then the pros are, I know I can go over and like get something that I need without having to like go to a different floor or whatever, go to a different department.
door.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And-
or
and
knock
the
on
reason-
someone's door. Yeah.
The reason like I originally brought that up was because it doesn't. It's like when I was working in a company like that, I didn't really have to get up and like talk to my
Right.
coworkers and stuff. You know, I didn't build relationships with my coworkers. I
Right.
wasn't friends with anybody that I worked with, really. You know, but here it's like you come in, it really does feel like a family, as cliche as it is. You know, because we do know about what's going on with each other outside of work.
Yeah.
Which is cool because in that other job, I know I wasn't happy. You know, I was just coming in because it was a job, and it was like I was putting in my hours and getting out like as soon as possible.
Right.
You know, here it's like I don't mind being around the office for however long I have to be. You know,
Yep.
if it's 10, 12 hours, whatever. You know, because it is enjoyable. You know, and that's you always hear people say like, oh yeah, Confucius said.
Confucius.
If you enjoy what you do, you'll never work
Yeah.
a day in your life.
Yeah.
But it's like now that I'm older and I've tried that type of working, and then now that I've tried this type of working, it's like I know that this makes me a lot happier. And sure, that doesn't mean like there aren't people that wouldn't be happy working in a job
Right.
like that. Like for example, we had someone here that probably would be that would be happy or is probably happier now in a position like that. But yeah, I know for myself, I think working in a closer company with more culture is better
Yes,
for
that's
me.
bliss and a curse because I love talking to people. I love being around people. That's why it makes me way more creative and productive. But at the same time, yeah. Like sometimes
Yeah.
you just
Distracted.
miss the point and then get so
Like,
distracted and then
okay.
what I was gonna do
Yeah.
today point, But yeah, it should be balanced, I guess.
Yeah. And for the people that are more remote, I think it does take a little bit more of an effort for everyone, especially on the office side, to get to know the
Right.
remote people and vice versa. And in a much more, we're going to get to know each other, even if we don't
Right.
work together on a daily basis, still to cultivate that type of relationship. So you have to be more cognizant about
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I know I personally try to do that with the people that are remote. Like I will go out of my way to say, hey, do you have time to jump on the phone or a Zoom call instead of like texting? One, because I hate typing, but two, like
Lazy.
I just feel like talking face to face, you just get to know the other person,
Trust
and
building too.
and
it's
it's-
trust building, yeah, and to me, it feel at least I'm trying to make them feel like they're not remote, even though they are. Like
That and it's so. I mean, we all know that it's so easy to misinterpret a text message,
Totally.
a Slack message, an email.
yeah,
If you're trying to be
Especially-
direct,
No
someone
tone.
might be like, "Wow, you're coming off as
You're rude.
yeah.
Like-
Especially
like-
if English is not
exactly.
your
Yeah,
native
right?
language.
It's the difference from saying, hey, I'll like texting, I'll be there in 15 minutes, and then the other person's like, what, you don't have time for me?
Yeah,
You're gonna put me off
Then
15 more minutes.
misinterpreted.
Versus like someone saying, hey, hang on for a second, I have
Yeah.
in 15 minutes I'll be there, but I have this one
but if
thing
you
to do. Yeah.
but if you write that out, you sound like a crazy person
Yeah.
because it's like a
Yeah.
paragraph long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, even though I was remote pretty much from the get go, I've known Andrew for a little bit. I've known Jared for a while now. So that was not an issue because we already kind of knew how the other
Yeah.
person speaks. And, so I think for the new people who are 100% remote, who hasn't known anyone in the company, it's a little bit harder
Yeah.
because they don't get the opportunity to learn the mannerisms
Right,
of the other
right.
people in the office. So
Shut
that's
up.
why it's important to reach out and
Yeah,
to
totally.
get just, even if it's just chatting, for like 15 minutes. How was your week?
We need a
Yeah.
Zoom happy hour.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I mean that's like something that we're trying to do in the future is when we do have remote people, we would like them to at least come visit the office at some point to meet everybody in person and, like, let's go hang out, grab dinner, and talk and just kind of like not just talk about like the projects and work and, things like that. way more social, and it's not like try not to make it like an uncomfortable social,
Yeah.
but because not everybody.
Like Nikki was here. It was perfect.
Yeah,
We
Nikki
went
was
to, like,
here.
a
Yeah.
happy
We went out
hour,
to
we
dinner.
hung
It
out,
was great.
lunch,
We
Talk
went out
about
to
Game
lunch a
of
couple
Thrones.
times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Found out she's an avid Game of
Yeah.
Thrones fan.
Now you have a computer in the
Yeah.
agency.
Yeah. So, it is definitely important that the inside team reaches out to the outside team to make them feel
Both sides
comfortable.
need to make an effort to do more than just the job that
Right.
they're working on together, because for long term, anything.
Yeah, especially, freelancers is a little bit different because it may just be a project by project basis. So it's
Mhm.
very much like, I need what your skill is. You need my money. Let's do this transaction. But yeah, when it's somebody who's a little bit long term, it definitely is important. Cool. So any final thoughts on like who wins the battle? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, how should it be?
No,
I think
What's the final idea then?
so
50-50.
What is 50-50?
yeah,
Sometimes you can spend, be flexible,
yeah.
hang out at home for a little bit, and then come in for a different.
Clearly this is a trend that's going to keep growing. It's going to just keep happening as the world gets flatter, as we like to say, because of the internet and things like that. So it's definitely not going away. So one question, I'll just throw this out there for everybody to kind of like talk about real quick is, what do you think the future of this model looks like?
I think that it will be more and more remote, but there will be better technology in
Tools.
place.
Definitely.
Almost like what is that?
Hologram.
That Facebook thing that follows you around, the video.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I know.
yeah.
But something like
The
an
portal.
iPad right in front of you, and
Right.
someone can like ring, and they appear.
Right.
So it's almost as if they just popped up to your desk.
Do you think there's like
Amazon do that?
robot?
Amazon Alexa thing.
The robot?
little video thing.
Yeah, Facebook portal it
Yeah.
zooms
It moves
in.
around.
It facial
Ah.
recognizes.
Google Nest does that too
Google
now,
Nest
yeah.
does it now. Yeah.
Something that makes it a lot that reduces the friction that remoteness causes
Right.
for just like casual, one-off interactions, because I think that's the biggest barrier from a day-to-day
Yeah.
standpoint.
So eventually it'll be like an all-day Zoom call.
Yeah.
Like
or
someone you just sign
you don't
in.
need to like watch each other, but like it would be. I mean, even if you think about if you have to call someone, especially from a cell phone, it's such a pain
oh,
to
yeah,
call someone
yeah,
from a cell phone sometimes.
Yeah.
So just being able to
I call more on Slack
click,
these days.
just like push to
Yeah, I
talk,
got
but
it.
it's a video, and it's like,
Yeah.
hey, you have a second? Cool. If not, like it's as if they came up to your
Right.
desk, and you can put like if I'm busy.
Do not disturb.
I could see that
Caleb's
happening
always
maybe
busy
in like
first.
like a long time. I think it's going to take a lot of time for businesses to like really lean into that idea. or,
Trust.
Like, yeah,
Right,
Yeah,
the
really
trust
trust
thing,
that
trust your
idea.
team.
Exactly. Because ultimately, I think like there's a human aspect that, being together with one another.
Well, yeah, there's like there's a
Causes,
physical energy that
yeah,
happens.
exactly.
It's chemistry
and, it's
and things like that. Yeah.
That face-to-face relationship is, I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think there's always going to be a need for it, but I do think in terms of co-space or like co-working spaces and working remotely, it's all about figuring out like what works for your industry, for your company, and finding the right balance, you
Right.
know? Because like without balance, everything's just gonna fall apart.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, if it's like a job where you physically have to be there, then obviously the model kind of
Yeah.
breaks. But
And it's like we work with like SaaS companies, and
Yep.
and I'm sure, I mean, I'm guessing, most of these guys probably just do a lot of heads down work,
Right.
So it's like they don't need to really interact with one another. Whereas, with
or the team is small that does.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
like the
Yep,
team
yep,
that's small.
exactly.
Yeah, I was listening the Basecamp's founders TED talk, and then he was talking about this study in an Asian country. I don't remember which one. So basically, people go to work like 1, 2, or 3 days per week, and then 1, 2, or 3 days they work like outside of the work. And I think that's going to be the future because
Yeah.
now like the transportation is getting way faster. Like I said, like other side of the world is
Right.
going to be 30 minutes. So you're going to be able to live anywhere you want and then just come to the office whenever you need to. Like whenever you need the people interaction, you're going to be able to come to office, come like have your meetings, have your brainstorm sessions. And then on the other days, you're just going to be able to work anywhere you want.
Yeah.
Just do your job,
That's
like,
an interesting model that
time,
I've heard of as well,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you're
yeah.
doing like half your time. I think that the premise of that is to create a better work-life balance.
Definitely.
You know, to like make sure, because like it's I guess it's okay to be outside of the office and not, you know, like feel like you're like chained to this desk is the feeling of that.
Yeah, like that way you have the flexibility and then you
Right.
have the office interaction too.
Work-life balance.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
we're-
definitely.
That's in topic list actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that.
There's a, I think it was in Sweden where the desks were on pulleys, and at 6 p.m. your desk would raise, and it's time to go home. They're like, we want you out.
Oh wow.
Nice.
So if you did not,
That's
I mean,
nice.
if you
Yeah.
had your like wallet
No
on it and
OTs.
it goes up, you're like,
Yeah, in
well,
Scandinavian countries it's like 35 hours, not
Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
Like they hate work, I
because
guess.
they're like,
I
no,
don't know.
well, they're like, don't, why stress yourself out? Like, it's work. You should enjoy work, but it shouldn't be your 100% life.
Yeah.
It's very different compared to Asia, though, like because I grew up in Asia, so like people up there, and yeah, they're workaholics, and they don't want to go home, or they feel obligated to be there just to perform better and show their authorities that, you know, I'm committed to this. But really, their minds are like out of there,
Right.
and then companies don't trust you for working remotely because they feel like you're probably not really doing your job. How do I know that I'm paying you for what you're doing?
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard in that part of the world because they still have that very traditional mindset of work. So I think it's very interesting how it's transitioning a little bit there as well, but not as liberal as it is here. So I think that's pretty different.
Yeah, and I think it's like as the world moves forward, like I think getting paid for your hours is now becoming less and getting versus your performance.
Yeah.
And not actually, and I don't mean performance as like the like certain goals you're hitting, but like even like small like achievements, like incremental performance.
I feel like maybe a slightly older generation set the tone of if you're busy, then that means you're
just because you're putting into 8 hours, 10
It's
hours.
like you're not really
and
busy
no,
for
it
the
should
right
be
thing.
like what your
More work.
results and what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, that actually brings up a really interesting thought for me. Like, it's like in Asian country, or actually, I guess even here, it's like if you think back, like a century ago, less than 50 years ago, you know, I think in general, people had a much more pessimistic view of human nature.
Right.
Whereas now it's like people want to think good of other people, you know, and I think there's definitely a movement towards being more positive, you know, encouraging people using positive reinforcement rather than, hey, you're not hitting your numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, like what Jen was saying brings up a good point about like even just like not taking time out of the equation. It's even just like in Asian countries, you know, they're more strict and everything. Whereas here, like the employment culture, I guess, kind of has shifted towards exactly what you were talking about, you know, like like rewarding people for doing everything that they're doing rather than just hitting a specific goal. You know?
And I think just in general, like people or companies are realizing like I'm not competing with Jeremy's time with just like him going, oh, he might leave us and go to another company. I'm competing with your home life. I'm competing with your friends. I'm competing with all the things you like to do outside of work. So I need to make sure that your time here is good. Right?
And you're happy.
Then you're happy. Yeah, I want you to be happy while you're here because if you're not, then you're gonna leave.
That's like
right?
I'm not sure if
and it's not.
sorry.
I'm not worried about you just leaving for another company. I'm worried about you leaving because you're like, you know what? I'd rather just go work 2 days and sit on the beach and be poor. But I know you can do the job, so we want to make that.
Leaving for another company is a big thing, but like you said, like 50 years ago, there wasn't that much options.
Right.
Like you had to stay in that company, otherwise,
yeah,
you're gonna
work
be
was
poor.
work,
But
and
now there are a lot of options.
Right.
So
But
you have to think about that, like employees.
But it's not just. I mean, you
Well-being.
can go figure out how to run a business online at home.
Definitely.
I'm competing with that too. You know.
Yeah.
So,
But it's like if you look at it, that I think that's why company culture has become such a big thing in the past like 10, 20 years. You know, like if you look at Google, you know, it was like big news when they started showing their office with like
Snacks.
We had
Showroom.
cereal.
People were like what the F? People work like this? Like
Nobody
you know,
uses
and then
those
now
toys,
it's-
by the way. Nobody. They just work.
I would
But
totally. I would use the nap pod.
Okay, makes sense. And maybe scooters.
Yeah, the scooters.
The thing about the snacks though for companies, once you offer them, you can't take them
That's
away.
true. That's true. I worked at a company that they did that.
And
they
you can't
offered
downgrade either.
the
Like
best healthy snacks, and then like budget got cut, and it was like goldfish
and then
crackers.
you're like
Like,
and then
seriously?
everybody knows. It's the first sign. Then you're like, oh, we're going under.
So
They cut
totally.
the snacks.
Yeah. All right.
They used to
Like
give
a
us
company with
LaCroix, and now
snacks.
we get like flat water.
Yeah, definitely.
Where's our snacks?
All right.
Jared?
So, next subject. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up, guys. This was awesome. I think this is definitely going to be a staple in the Run with Tobe podcast. Thank you guys for being on. We'll definitely have a part 2 of this because I do want to hear the opinions from the other people that weren't able to be here. So, yeah, shout out, right? Yeah. So normal plugs. Don't forget, guys, you can follow us at Run With Tobe on any social. You can subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google, or anywhere you get your podcast. We are there, and look forward to more episodes of the group therapy, Tobe therapy
So it's
session.
group therapy now?
I don't know. I keep saying that.
I named it Roundtable. What happened to that?
Roundtable's good too. Roundtable's good too.
Okay.
But what happens when we don't have a round, cushiony table to sit around?
Rectangle
Rectangular
table.
table.
Yeah. So,
Toby talks.
This should be
Tobe,
Is this Ottoman? We should name it like
this
Ottoman.
is an Ottoman.
Yeah.
Ottoman, like the Ottoman Empire.
Ottoman talk.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. On that note, guys, we will see you guys on the next one, and don't forget, we will have all the show notes listed at the bottom of the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Bye.